Hello and welcome to Creating a Human Rights Culture, which aims to promote a lived awareness of the interdependency and indivisibility of human rights principles in our minds, hearts, and bodies, that is, dragged into our everyday lives. What, after all, is freedom of speech to a person who is homeless and lives in a world at war? Therefore, it is dedicated ultimately to the application of the Human Rights Triptych, which in brief consists of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at its center, the conventions, that is, international treaties on the right, and implementation measures on the left.
Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Creating a Human Rights Culture, which calls for a lived awareness of human rights principles in our minds and our hearts, and integrated into our everyday lives. I'm here today with Glenroy Buchanan. Here he is. Stand up, take a bow. It's okay, you can sit down. He has worked extensively over the years with the Native American Intertribal Council of Western Massachusetts and surrounding communities. Taking our cue, so to speak, from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, its acronym being UNTRIP, it's a progeny, so to speak, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That is, it came after, it's kind of its child, one of its children or something. The Universal Declaration is the authoritative standard of human rights principles. Now, UNTRIP was endorsed by the General Assembly in 2007, and the United States was the last country in the United Nations, the other latecomers being Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, countries with sizable indigenous populations, to endorse that document. Its acronym again being UNTRIP, audience get used to that acronym, under the Obama administration in 2010. Let us also recall that the Obama administration, during that time, came up with an apology for the treatment of indigenous peoples. In the Defense Appropriations Act of 2010, for example, tucked away on page 45 of the 67-page document, it reads, "The United States, acting through Congress," and that's a quote, this is also a quote, "apologizes on behalf of the people of the United States to all Native peoples for the many instances of violence, maltreatment, and neglect inflicted on Native peoples by citizens of the United States, and expresses its regret for the ramifications of former wrongs and its commitment to build on the positive relationships of the past and present to move toward a brighter future where all the people of this land live reconciled as brothers and sisters and harmoniously steward and protect this land together." End of quote. Yet later on, and this is a quote, "Nothing here authorizes or supports any claim against the United States or serves as a settlement of any claim against the United States." In other words, you can't do anything with it. They didn't say it so starkly and forthrightly, but basically on what they said, you can't do anything with it. Shortly thereafter, President Obama acknowledged this apology. All of this is hardly known, so I ask you, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? I don't think so. And the same with that apology. Be that as it may, however, the United States government, in fact, all of the governments of the world, are, for lack of a better word from their perspective, stuck. I don't think they are stuck. It's a great document. They have to implement it with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNTRIP. It is a beautiful document, actually, which lists various rights that our indigenous brothers and sisters are entitled. As a general rule, governments tend to be reluctant following through with human rights principles generally, And UNTRIP is no different. It's up to us to implement those principles. True, the United States of America, I don't like saying America, by the way. Just look at a map. North America, South America. This is the United States of the Americas. Why they call it the Americas is another story, but we'll get into that. We've made progress under the Biden administration by appointing Deb Haaland, an Indigenous woman, as Secretary of the Interior. The town of Amherst and other municipalities, if not states, have also made progress by, for instance, declaring what was formerly Christopher Columbus Day as Indigenous Peoples Day. We need to do more. At least for the time being, let us discuss and debate, which is what we're doing substantively here, how we can implement the principles of UNTRIP. After all, only chosen values endure, and any programs, practices, or policies to implement the principles of UNTRIP will fail unless there is public sentiment to support them. Glenroy, we'll get to you in a minute. Sorry, I can't help myself, but I forewarned you. I am a professor, after all. Give me the floor and forget it. But we'll give you time. But for the time being, let me just give you a smattering of some of the principles from UNTRIP. Indigenous peoples have a right to self-determination. By virtue of that right, they freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. That's Article 3. Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinct political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions. Article 5. Indigenous peoples have the right not to be subjected to forced assimilation or destruction of their culture. Article 8. Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and the right to develop past, present, and future manifestations of their culture, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, ceremonies, and visual and performing arts and literature. Finally, and I chose these more or less arbitrarily, Indigenous people have the right to repatriation of their human remains. Article 12. And the list goes on. So Glenroy, you've been working with this tribal council for a number of years. How come you're not doing all that? It's a joke. It's a joke. All right? You can't. You're just, what are you going to do? Government should be doing that. Governments should progressively realize, it's a UN term I like very much, to realize these rights. Anyway, the floor now is yours. Glenroy, in the first part of the show, maybe you can just talk about some of the things that you and your group are doing. And of course, let us know anything that you'd like us to know regarding the situation of Indigenous peoples in Western Massachusetts, and anything that we could do to help out. Maybe you don't want us to help out. I mean, do it on your own. But say whatever you'd like. In the second half, I'd like to run some of the principles of UNTRIP by you, if we have the time. And then you can simply give me your opinion about those principles in the hopes of developing a creative dialogue, which is another human rights term, with our viewers, and a creative dialogue with people in power, those in government, or what have you. So that's what we're going to do. So here's Glenroy. I'm going to leave this very open. You could basically say anything your little heart desires, and talk about what you want. I know, for example, that children the situation of children is very close to your heart. For our viewers, I'd like you to know Glenroy organized it's a celebration of the rights of the child on November 20th in Springfield, and the mayor was there. I'm hesitating to say celebration because there's not much to celebrate. 70% of children, from what I've read on the internet, drop out of high school in Holyoke, and we had discussed this. There's a prison Freudian slip. There's an high school education to prison pipeline. I think it's prison to prison, but that's another story. And Springfield has roughly 40% children live in poverty. So, but we were celebrating the rights of the child, and I mentioned we discussed Indigenous people. But if you don't want to talk about children, you could talk about anything your little heart desires that will help us understand the situation of Indigenous people in Western Mass or throughout the world. And maybe you want to tell us a little bit about yourself initially, and then we can go from there. So that's it. Shut up, Professor. Okay.
I should say thanks for having me here today. I've worked with you on the flag raising ceremony down at City Hall in Springfield with Mayor Sano. One of my reasoning for being involved in that, and again, let me stop and say, the things that I'm about to say to you, these are my inner voice, and doesn't necessarily represent what maybe other people are thinking, or it might not represent what the group, the Native Intertribal Council of Western Massachusetts and surrounding communities, would take on as a group thing. But I do speak for myself, and hopefully some of that would also reflect in how the group is run. I can tell you that back in 2002, I just got back from Africa. I've been there 6 times with a group from UMass, the nurses, who went down twice a year to do infant mortality rate. And I came back and went into Springfield to visit a friend of mine that I went to school with, talking about my trip. And that right there went into a segue of a lady who was sitting in the same room saying, you know, I'm a Native American and we've been trying to put something together. Could you help us? And I said, well, you know, I don't know. I know about the Native American problem in this country, and I'm not sure what I can do. But if you can give me a hint as to what you think I can do, how I can be helpful, I'll give it a shot. So about a month later, she had me meet, at the time, the chief of the organization, which was, his tribal name is Greyhawk, but also he's Native American, and he's been trying to put this group together for years and never got any ground with it. So I told him that I'd help him out. So we started off by identifying the fact that there are a lot of people in Springfield who are Native Americans. And what I learned very quickly was that a lot of them, when, you know, back years and years ago, before I was even born, that they would not use their tribal name, and a lot of them had their name changed to fit into the culture so they wouldn't be discriminated against. And part of that broke my heart, but still I understood why they had to go undercover. So that's kind of like how I got pulled into the organization to help them to get a 501c nonprofit status. And we started with some basic. After we started to identify who was Native American, we found that there was a big majority of people who were lacking certain things in their lives that we needed to help on. So we started we started a kitchen where we would have food distribution in Springfield and also clothes distribution and anything else that that community or those people would need to have in their lives. And so that's how I got started, just with that. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but that was the foundation that started me off. What I became more and more interested in is I was able to look at African American struggles in this country, and I looked at Native American struggles. I looked at people from Poland, people from other countries that came into this country and had a hard way to go, a hard way to make life easy for them and their family. And so it dawned on me over the last several years, and in particular this year, when I read an article about that there was almost 8,500 Native Americans who were stolen from their tribal place. It was said that they had been beaten and raped and buried out in who knows where. And I thought that was like really disgusting. And they had also brought that to the government in the United States. It brought that to their attention to say, how can you help these tribes? You know, you might want to put in some police force or stuff like that. And it seems to me like everybody was dragging their feet. And then I came to find out that Native Americans also suffered from people trying to change them into what they would want them to be, as opposed to letting them be part of their own culture, their own lifestyle, their own way of living, their own way of dealing with society, and not only the society, but the universe as a whole. So that stuff started to kind of like, when I say get on my nerve, it was irritating because 8,500 people being kidnapped and raped and beaten and killed and buried in the woods, and people don't know where they are. That's a big number, you know, for anybody, for any culture. And so when I came across the article about indigenous people and also indigenous rights with Professor Wronka,
whatever.
Wronka,
You're doing great.
I thought, okay, let me see what I can do with this. So we put together a flag raising ceremony every year in Springfield that we go down. We've done it with Mayor Ryan, Mayor Sarno, and that relationship has turned out well. At the present time, we're trying to find a home for the organization because there's a lot more stuff we think we can accomplish in doing that. So to make things short, my whole goal in this is to start off by doing projects that will aid the community, to aid people who are Native American and who know they're Native American, and to this day would like to practice and live in the tradition that they were brought up by, or the culture that they have, that they had in this country. Now, we can debate this as long as we want, but it's pretty hard for someone to live in a house, and because you didn't know that that street existed and that house existed, that you can claim that you just discovered it, not if someone's living it. And it's kind of like that with the indigenous people. You know, they came here and they found people living good, living successfully, because for the first group of people that started drifting in after the Native Americans had made their culture satisfactory and on the grand stage, it was kind of like when these people got here, they would have starved in the wintertime because they didn't know how to deal with this environment. And so the Native American kind of brought them in and tried to help them out to live. and honor the land, honor the people, honor the culture. And that went on for a little while until they started rounding them up and sometimes killing them and massacring them, running them off their land, telling them that this is where you're going to live from now on. That the Native American says, okay. As soon as they found out that that the lands had gold or had oil or something like that, then they would kick them off and send them someplace else. And so it's hard to say, well, they're not doing anything, they don't want to get any place, they're lazy, they just, that's the same kind of thing that I saw went through the African American community. As soon as they started building a neighborhood or a city that was progressive and that had a bank and had a school, they had dentists, is a whole city that was doing good. They would find an excuse to come in and burn it down and murder people and all this other kind of stuff. So that kind of made me see the correlation between that. And I'm not trying to say that other groups of people don't have this problem, but I also know that all the people that migrated to this country when they first came here, they had a hard road to travel in order to get where they are today, not only with themselves, but with their families. So my thing is to start to look at how we can educate kids to go back to start, the foundation, the platform, and look at those things, and you readily be understand why things are the way they are today. But you got to go back to the basics. You got to go back to the platform. You got to go back to where it originated from, and you can see how it developed through the years and why things are the way they are now. It didn't just pop out of the air or pop out of the sky. It's something that was made to be either a law or something that was against them, and to this day it matriculated into what it is today. So those are the things that brought me into the conversation.
Sounds great. And everything you mentioned, the rapes, the killings, the loss of cultural heritage, and all those things are violations of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So, and that's why we're here today. So, is there anything else that you would like to bring up at this in this point about Indigenous children or children in general? And because I know that that's something dear to your heart. Well, you sort of brought it up now a little bit, but
my thing is that we're growing kids, we're growing young people in this country, and I have to look at it. Kids are kids, okay? Babies are babies. I don't care if they're black, white, green, yellow, pink, purple. It doesn't make any difference. They're still children, and that is the future of the country. And so many of them live in the condition that they're living in, that even by the time they get into their teens, their early teens or middle teens, and they're still not grown people, their whole acculturation has been tarnished, okay? And the reason I say that is I'm saying that we have to be honest with ourselves and accept the fact that there are many different cultures in this country. And if people, there's only one family, and it's the human family, okay? And if they want people and kids to change behaviors, to look at this country in terms of what it should be and what it was put together to be, then we got to go back to the beginning, the platform, the place where all of this started, and we got to move with that, and we have a good understanding of why there was slavery, why women were seen as property to their husbands, why kids were pulled from their parents and tried to be indoctrinated with someone else's culture other than their own. So all these things are things that I'm saying that right now I know the schools aren't up and really wanting to teach American histories within the classroom. What I'm saying to the young people is that there's Google. You can Google things. You can go on your computer, smartphone, and you can ask questions. And a lot of times you can get things that are sensible. You're going to run into a few things that some wise person or some person think they're funny to put some sort of lie or fake things in there. We understand that. But in general, you have parents, you have schools, you have libraries, you have smartphones, you have computer. Look at some of these things. Go back and look how they got started. Once you know how they got started and what was the meaning for them being started, then you have a better foundation to understand why things are happening the same way they're happening now as they did 200 or 300 years ago. The platform and the foundation is the beginning of your journey to find out how we can change things in the present and move into the future.
Okay, sounds good to me. I mean, there's no reason why we can't do these things.
Mm-hmm. None at all. None at all.
I also want to go back. You said something about when this land was supposedly discovered. Those weren't your words exactly, but you did when it was founded. If we have time, or in the second half, I am on the executive committee of the United Nations NGO Committee on the Rights of Indigenous People, and we just drafted a letter to Pope Francis asking for an apology for the Doctrine of Discovery. Many of our viewers don't know about this doctrine, but what after the United States was discovered, even a little before when Europe started going into Africa, but it sort of got its impetus, it sort of got its, started get going after the United States was, like I say, discovered. And Pope Alexander II came up with a doctrine. It was called the Doctrine of Discovery. And what the doctrine basically said, if European Christians go on land and the people that live there are not Christians, that means that they have discovered the land and they own it. Mm. And we have asked Pope Francis to apologize for that. Mm-hmm. And maybe in the second half of this I'll show you that letter, we could talk about that. Mm-hmm. So, so now what do you want to talk about? I have some articles from the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Part of the show is to simply let people know about these human rights documents and some of the things that they say. And so if it's okay with you, I'll read a few of them, and then you can, my question is, how do you think we're doing in regard to these principles, and what could we do to make the world a better place that is a lot more, well, the word isn't accommodating, but no, it's not the right word, a lot more, well, not just empathetic, so I can't even think of the word, or sympathetic, a lot more helping to the situation of indigenous people. Mm-hmm. So, so I'll read a few of these, unless you want to say anything else in general.
That's fine.
Okay, so I'm just choosing these arbitrarily. So just comment. There's an Article 31 and I gave a smattering of some articles initially, that says, I'll just read it and then comment. Say whatever you want. Do you think that the United States, how we're doing in regards to this principle, and what could we do from here, and what people can do? So for example, and I like this article, Article 31 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, UNTRIP, says that Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their cultural heritage. Let me read the whole thing unless you want to stop at each one. They have a right to maintain, control, protect, like I just said, not only their cultural heritage, their traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expressions, as well as the manifestations of their sciences, technologies, and cultures, including human and genetic resources, seeds, medicines, knowledge of the properties of fauna and flora, to protect their oral traditions, their literature, their designs, their sports and traditional games, and their visual and performing arts. They also have the right to maintain, control, protect, and develop their intellectual property over such cultural heritage, traditional knowledge, and traditional cultural expressions. We can talk about that. As you know, I lived in Alaska for some time, and in this Athabascan community, what the elders said was that, I'm just telling you what they said, that there were a lot of researchers wanting to film the funerals of their elders. And they told them, this goes against our culture. You know, what are we, animals to gape at or something? And if I may, according to Howard Zinn, he's I don't know if you know him, but well, he passed away, I think, about 9 years ago. He wrote about the debates when the Europeans came here, whether Native Americans were animals or not. Okay, all right? And what the elders were telling me was, look, they think we're interesting animals, or we should be in zoos or something. We told them, don't show up with your cameras. According to them, they said just the researchers showed up like crazy. And I also teach, by the way, in a school of social work, okay, Springfield. And our accrediting agency, the Council on Social Work Education, came up with an apology of the way that it's treated Indigenous people over the years. And they would just research Indigenous people, often without their informed and free consent, okay? And they'd come up with interesting things about them, and it was kind of demeaning. It's kind of like you want to not come up with interesting things. It's like you're a research voyeur, I call it. You want to participate in their struggles. Where am I going with this? Well, I'm not really sure exactly, but maybe I could have some of your comments on what I just said. How do you feel that has the United States given Indigenous people the right to develop and protect their cultural heritage? And I don't know, what do you think? Have we? Has the United States? I guess I should say white people, but I don't know.
Well, you know, I have a short answer for that.
Okay.
Your question had a lot of
Well, there's all sorts of stuff in there. It's kind of,
no, it had all good stuff in there. It's all good stuff that we face. What I would say is that there's a duality in terms of acceptance in this country. So in World War II, okay, prior to that, Native Americans were all seen as savages, all seen as people who scalp people and people who is going to raid their houses and eat their babies, you know, crazy stuff. But in World War II, when the United States drafted Native Americans into the service,
Yes.
okay, it can be said today that one of the most impacted inclusion to our military was when they brought the code breakers in.
Yes, I know the code
Who was able to communicate with them, to be able to keep secret, to be able to transfer information that helped the whole country as a whole, the whole Army, Navy as a whole. And once they finished that and came back home, then they were nothing but savages or people not worthy to be seen in an honorable way. Okay, so on one end, they were seen as these enormously talented people
Yes.
who saved this country from a lot of deaths and brutality in what is warfare, is always. We were able to transfer information and no one could decipher those, which made a huge difference in the outcome, okay?
Right.
But that was even now, they don't teach that, and that should be in history books in the school. But if you put it in the history books, then it elevates those people to where they need to be, and they can't no longer be seen as disruptive culture within a culture.
Yes. In public discourse nowadays, they speak about that as structural racism.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's in the, it's not even in the history books.
That's right.
And this could be part of what's also discussed about nowadays as critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on, let's look at the contributions of African Americans and Native Americans, and let's just do that.
And
By the way,
it was the same with the Tuskegee Institute,
I know the Tuskegee.
where they were always trying to portray Black Americans or African American people as not being smart enough or educated enough or strong enough to be pilots. It would be something they just could never learn, okay?
I know.
And once they were given the chance, okay, you got and people, it's very well known that they were a crucial part in bringing that war to an end by destroying. They were so good in what they do, okay, destroying the enemy, and where this country again came out as victory within that war. You can't do that. You can't put them in a glorious position, and then when they come back to this country after saving the country, they can't even find a place to live.
Yes.
Okay? And one of the things I find...
That's a problem with the way we treat veterans
Right.
in general also. I think it's horrendous.
It is.
It's horrendous.
Yeah, it is. And my struggle with that is that you can't keep doing that. You can't keep having people come out and do these things, and then at the end you run them away to say that they haven't done anything. Because we'll see, if you elevate them to what they have done in a satisfactory way, then you can't say they don't deserve to be considered a citizen. And one of the things I find interesting too, and we got to really work on that, the culture kind of has pitted people against people, okay? Now, it's not just African American, Black Americans that are suffering in this country, okay? We got to start using that term, which everybody is afraid to use, is that there's poor white people in this country.
Yes.
There is poor white people who are going through the same disenfranchise as Native American, as Native American, as
Yes.
African American is going through. There's poor white people.
Yes.
And if those people are then educated to think that things are being pulled away from them or this stuff is going towards them and we're not getting any, we got to start talking to them. And white people have to understand there are poor white people in this country that are pitted against other poor people to get a scrap of what the society's all about. We got to start people have to start seeing that it's not only black people, Puerto Rican people, Asian people that is poor, you got poor white people in this country.
Yes.
And they, as a majority and as a minority, okay, keeps that tension going within the society, okay? Because those are the people who would step out there with the help of these other people to lynch and hang and brutalize innocent people because they thought that they were being mistreated. It's a complicated story, but it's not complicated in that you don't know what it is. Just go back to the beginning, go back to the foundation, and move it forward, and you'll see why this started and why it's happening today.
Well, that's very well said. If you don't mind, and this is my own, it's a positive stereotype. You know, there's positive stereotypes too. Because I worked in indigenous cultures in Alaska for some time, and it was an Athabascan community, and it had a suicide rate something like, at the time, about 9 times higher than in the white people, okay? And alcoholism, you know, was off the charts. It's a form of colonial imperialism. Indigenous people have to use the white man's drug. Okay, and they just can't take it. I mean, I've seen some clients. This was a while back. They'll have a 6-pack, and they'll wake up in the morning, and they'll have scales on there, like fish scales, on their arms. So it's terrible. But what I'm trying to say is, many of the indigenous people in the community, despite all these problems, were basically saying, "Well, how could we help white people? They have their problems too." And it's kind of part of indigenous culture to share and to be concerned with everybody. And this is what you just said. Okay? You know, well, in that instance, okay, the whites were on a number of indices better than mentally whatever, better. But indigenous people have a certain sense of sharing about them and wanting to make sure that everybody partakes in the pie. And I just have to say, and I apologize a little bit because here I am being a professor again, but I wanted you to do more of the talking. But I just have to say that the history, okay, of so-called minority groups. Well, they're not really minority groups. They're really peoples. They're people with their own culture, their own traditions, their own ways of learning things, and their own food, things like that. That these different people, okay, different peoples, basically got together very well. They just liked working with each other, okay? Even when I was a kid, just by way of example, I grew up in a European family, and I played accordion in the 50s, 60s, and my Polish father wanted me to learn German songs. And I said, "But Daddy, you told me that Germany was so terrible to Poland." And he said, "The German and the Polish people love one another. He said, the lousy, stinking governments did it. It's like the heads of government and even religious leaders, they're the ones that kind of set us up. But the people just love each other. I mean, and like you just said. And I remember Columbus Columbus was very strange, and he was sort of a religious zealot, if not, I'm going to say the word fanatic. He used to, according to Howard Zinn, he would cut off the ears of the Indians for the Blessed Trinity. Now, what is this? Somehow he was sort of whipped up into, I don't know, hate or something. And dogma and religion can play a role in all that. And these religious leaders, not all of them, of course. I kind of like this guy, Pope Francis, but they tend to set us up, and they whip up hate when actually people get along very well. You've heard about, Rwanda, what happened, Holocaust. Well, I don't know if you want to call it a Holocaust, the genocide in Rwanda. It was 25 years ago now. The Hutu and the Tutsi basically got along well until religious leaders got involved.
Well,
they just get involved and they start getting weird. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead. Well, we're just sort of having a give and take now. So.
Well, the thing that I like to have people understand is that nothing is out of our reach. We can solve anything we want to solve.
Yes.
But what we have here is a situation that's so encrusted within the society, within the communities, okay, that people think that it's a barrier. It's a barrier in the sense that it protects them from those bad people over here, okay, or those bad people over here. But, people make mistakes.
Yes.
People do things that are not good, okay, and that's not just one thing that's attributed to one group of people or one cultural group of people, okay, but it's just people in general do things that they shouldn't do sometimes, okay. But
not me. No, I'm just joking. No, we're all human.
Yeah, but
okay.
the thing that makes it difficult is that we perpetuate them in a way where it's economically good to have them in that situation, okay? Because we can't forget the system that we live in, which is a system that should work for everybody, okay? Not just a few, and then the few that that prosper from it, put the other group pitted against themselves. And at some point, people got to understand that, again, got to go back to the foundation, got to look at the platform, understand how it got started, why it got started, for whom it got started, and then you'll know why it's still happening up here. Like at one point they says a woman could not, as example, a woman was the property of her husband.
Yes.
And she couldn't bring charges against him.
Yes.
And he could pretty much do anything against her within an inch of her life, killing her.
Exactly.
Okay, and so if you can go back and understand that, you can be up here to know why this stuff is still going on. We don't live in a much more humane society because none of us, whether we're men or women, can get into this this life unless you pass through a woman. There's no other way to get into this life, this thing, without passing through a woman.
Yeah.
And they should be respected. They should be honored. They shouldn't be made into walk in hatred, so that they're despised by people. They shouldn't have a voice. There should be no equality. all these other things. They shouldn't get paid like other people get, and we have all these things that are pro-negative, instead of pro-helpful, to make it a much more inclusive society so people can live and enjoy it without these stigmas. Again, you got to go back to the beginning, back to the platform, understand where it started, how it started, and you know exactly why it exists in here and now. So up here you can start to what's the word I'm saying? Take it apart, demolish. Here you can start demolishing it.
Eradicate it.
Eradicate it, yes.
Eradicate from the Latin, getting at its roots, literally.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Right. Well, one of these roots, I think, has been, like I said, this doctrine of discovery that still exists today.
Mm-hmm.
When European Christians came here, they basically followed the lead of, I think it was Pope Alexander VI,
Mm-hmm.
who said, if you go to a land and the people there aren't Christians, then you have a right to that land.
Mm.
And there have been Supreme Court decisions in 1955 and also, I believe, 2004 that basically said that indigenous people have been discovered by white people.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have certain rights.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I'd like to do is, if it's okay with you, I'll show our viewers the letter that we have written, as the executive committee has written,
Mm-hmm.
with the for the United Nations non-governmental organization on the rights of indigenous peoples.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so maybe we can stop this discussion right now.
Okay.
All right,
Mm-hmm.
unless there's something burning on your.
No.
And then we'll, I'll show the viewers the letter,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll wrap up. Maybe with, I didn't read many articles, but maybe with an article or two. Okay.
Yep.
So, so thank you, and
Thanks for having me here.
Alexis, is it okay?
Yeah, so do you want to read that?
Yeah. Why don't I read it? By the way, how long have we been going? I don't.
Over an hour.
Okay, so let me read the letter. Do you mind?
No, I don't, but is that the one that you sent me?
Yes.
Okay.
I didn't think we'd get to it, but considering we're here now. Oh, it was an hour? Okay, I thought we were going to stop at half an hour. It doesn't matter. We're living and learning. So thank you.
Yeah.
Alexis, did I make any sense?
Yes, of course.
I thought you made a lot more sense than I did. I mean, you speak from your heart. I'm sort of academic.
Well, I also want to tell people that I got rear-ended in my car. And if anyone's trying to sell an old car,
You want to tell him? You could tell him.
contact me. Because that's one of the things I do is to get food to people.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be, I don't have to have a new car. I don't have to have, anything like that. I just want something to get me around in. Because like this year, I got a call on Monday, 2 Mondays ago, from one of the farmers. They had about 8 bins of butternut squash. A bin is about 4 feet high, and it's about like 6 by 6 by 6. It might be a little bit bigger than that. And it was full with butternut squash, which he says, Glenroy, I know you usually take them and distribute them. Can you come? I says, have no transportation. So a lot of times they throw this food away because in terms of business, they can't put their laborers to deal with that. They dump it. They dump it.
Well, something, I could ask Alexis. I mean,
they dump it.
maybe you could mention it. All right?
What? I'm sorry.
Glenroy, you distribute food to the poor?
Yeah.
He just does it. He distributes food to the poor, and he got rear-ended, and he's looking for a car.
I said that as a joke.
Well, is it a joke or?
I mean, you could use this. This is your platform, so feel free to use it in any way that you deem necessary.
Okay, I tell you what. Before we get going, it's not a joke. Why don't you just say what you told me? I'll say it, okay? And how could they get in contact with you anyway? What's your email?
gbuchanan@gmail.com. I mean, gbuchanan00@gmail.com.
Okay, how about this? I will put that up on the bottom of the screen, and you say email this email that you see here.
Okay, we'll do that. Okay.
So what order do you want to do everything in?
I thought that would be in green. Remember I sent you that in green? No.
Yeah.
Can you scroll the letter in green that I sent you?
Yeah, I can do that, but this is just for you to be.
Oh, great,
Are you
yeah.
going to read it?
I'll read it.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
No,
it's just for you to read it.
Okay, so this is an official letter we sent to the Pope,
Okay.
all right? And I think that's at the bottom of everything. It says, the Doctrine of Discovery, of course, has nothing to do with what Christ taught, which was to do things for the least of these and to feed the hungry. And okay, so, but it just got screwed up somehow. Okay, so I tell you what we'll do then. I'll say before I read this letter, just Glenroy has a few words, and he, all right, and then they'll put your email up there.
Oh,
Do you mind?
no.
Okay, all right.
I'll come back to do when you're ready to read.
Okay, so I'll just mention this now about Glenroy. Why not? Who knows? Okay,
So
so I
when-
can start?
Yeah.
Okay, hello again. I would like to read the letter that the Executive Committee of the Non-Governmental Organization on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples came up with to Pope Francis to have an apology for the Doctrine of Discovery. Say, look, before I do that, my colleague and my friend here got in a car accident a while back. His car is totally. Truck, excuse me. Okay, and he literally delivers food to the poor, and he has no way to do it now. So, well, you take it from here, or I'll take it. If anybody has a used car or used truck where it could be filled with food and things like that, you can contact Glenroy. Do you want to say any more about that?
Yeah, I was saying, what I was saying was that this was unfortunate, but it's almost a year now that I wasn't in an accident. I was actually rear-ended. I was at a stoplight waiting for the light to change, and this car ran into the back of my truck and went under my truck, messed up my muffler, my bumpers, and also kind of twisted the frame. And the case is still ongoing. But in the meantime, what I used to do in the farming community here, I know a lot of farmers, they used to allow me to bring people out there to do what's called a second harvest. And we would bring that food to people in need or community in need to help them bring through the summer. And since that accident, I haven't had a car or I hadn't had any transportation, which is what I need is a truck. So what I was saying is that if anyone has a truck that's in good shape that can run, it doesn't have to be new, it could be old, but just as long as it's reliable. It could be a pickup truck, it could be a van, that I would pay for it. You know, I don't mind paying for it, but just something that's workable, because this year I lost the ability to donate a whole bunch of food that was there to be donated, but if you don't get it out of the places that need to be get over, they get tilled back into the soil and stuff like that. So I'm saying if anyone has a truck, a pickup truck or a van, something like that, that's in good shape, that they don't need, but they do want to get some money from it, please contact me. My email is gbuchanan00@gmail.com.
Let's spell it out. GBUCHANAN00@gmail.com. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll read this, and you're going to show this, right?
Yeah, are you reading it from here or from there?
I'm reading it from there.
Okay, great.
All right?
So would you mind counting us in before you start?
No, I just want to say a few words, and then I'll read it, okay?
Okay.
Well, are we on now, or what?
Yeah. I was just asking you to do like a 3, 2, 1 and then start.
Okay, all right. So 3, 2, 1. Hi, everybody. So I would like to read the letter that the Executive Committee of the NGO Committee on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples at the UN in New York drafted to His Holiness Pope Francis to ask for an apology for the Doctrine of Discovery, which I think largely is at the bottom of the origins of what you had mentioned. Mm-hmm. So here's a letter, and let's begin. His Holiness Pope Francis, the NGO Committee on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in New York greets you with warm regards and hopes that this letter finds you in good health. Our committee is a special committee of the Conference of Non-Governmental Organizations in consultative relationship with the United Nations. Its acronym is CONGO, an independent international membership association founded in 1948, the year of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Our work focuses on raising the visibility of indigenous peoples and their issues within the United Nations system and beyond. Our membership comprises indigenous peoples organizations, ally organizations, and individuals. Recalling the words of Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce Nation, quote, that the kindness and humility of Christ is much like the spirit of the Indian, and the words of Crazy Horse, the spiritual leader of the Lakota Sioux, which is peace, humility, and everlasting love, the Executive Committee of the NGO Committee on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples respectfully request that you, Most Holy Father, reconsider the Doctrine of Discovery, originally promulgated by Pope Alexander VI in 1493, soon after the so-called, quote, discovery of the lands now commonly known as the Americas. In brief, this doctrine states that lands discovered by European Christians inhabited by those other than Christians, who are not Christians, shall be considered nullius terra, that is, no man's land, inhabited by heathens and savages. Thus, the European Christians are entitled to the land. While that document originated more than 6 centuries ago, it still has legal, if not symbolic, ramifications. In the T. Hit Ton case of 1955, for example, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against the Tlingit Nation, allowing corporate timber companies, based in large measure on that doctrine, to engage in exploitive environmental practices in parts of the then territory of the United States, now known as the state of Alaska. More recently, the United States Supreme Court in City of Sherrill versus Oneida Indian Nation of New York, 2005, writing for the majority, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg stated, "Under the doctrine of discovery, fee title ownership to the lands occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived became vested in the sovereign, first the discovering European nation, and later the original states and the United States." Those are just two examples, but the list goes on. Upon your reconsideration, an official apology focusing on the doctrine of the discovery and its devastating effects on indigenous peoples around the world should be issued from you as the head of the Catholic Church. Such an action would have far-reaching positive implications for indigenous peoples. St. John Paul II, for example, apologized for the role Christianity played in the Holocaust. Soon thereafter, the recently deceased Elie Wiesel, a concentration camp survivor, stated, "Relations between Christians and Jews have never been so good." Whereas we acknowledge your support of the right to self-determination of indigenous peoples over the years, we feel that at least setting up an international committee or commission that includes indigenous peoples to review the doctrine and its effects, as well as develop an official apology to indigenous peoples, would do much to further concretize your everlasting love for the peoples of the world, including indigenous peoples. In closing, we look forward to your response, and you can use indigenous.committee@gmail.com to do so. Please be assured that we wish you the best always and commend the many wonderful efforts you make to bring reconciliation, peace, and justice to our world. Respectfully submitted, Robert Barrero. He's indigenous, and he's Taino, as chair of the committee, and that's it. So thanks everyone for listening. I would thank you very much, Glenroy, for your insights and for coming. It's been a pleasure. I would shake your hand or even hug you for that matter, because you did great stuff. I kind of love everything you said, and hope to have you back again. So,
Sure.
So that's all I have to say. Do you have any other words to say?
I know this has been your lifelong obligation, your lifelong investment in humanity.
Project.
And I certainly respect that and think that's an honorable and a noble thing to be doing. I certainly would be willing at any time if you needed my help or my voice to come in and deal with that. That wouldn't be an issue at all. I would recognize that as a pleasure and a gift.
Well, you're on another time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Thank you.
Yep.